Hello, I'm Sandra Jungers, and again, I am pleased to be here with you this afternoon presenting you information on developmental care. And for those of you that are coming back for the second in the series of 3 today, glad to have you back. We're going to talk about developmentally supportive care and the neurosensory system and how that is impacted by the environment as well as some of our caregiving practices in the NICU. And let's just sort of start off about in the beginning, okay? The experience that an infant has, when he comes to us earlier than what he would have liked to have come to us, and the fact that we start with this premature infant on admission. How many of you have seen an infant that looks like this shortly after admission? This is an infant that has hardly been in the unit more than an hour. And note his position. Notice the vulnerability of this infant. Notice how the environment is totally different from the environment that he was accustomed to. Remember, he didn't ask to get here. It's sort of an experience that he would have rather not taken part in, and that he would have rather stayed in utero for the 39 to 40 weeks and then been much more prepared to make his journey into the world. But, and I look at this picture and I can only imagine the first time that a parent comes into our NICU. What do they think when they see their infant with their arms and their legs outstretched, and the fact that maybe they don't have on a diaper, maybe they've got an umbilical arterial line, maybe they've got IVs, maybe they're intubated and they're on a ventilator. It's probably one of the most overwhelming experiences that any of our parents will ever go through. Because you have to remember that they didn't expect to be in our house to begin with. They actually expected to go to the newborn nursery or to be out on the mother-baby couplet care unit enjoying, their newborn baby. But once we have this infant here, we have to really realize that this infant is counting on us to give him the best possible care that we can. And also remember that trust is gained from this infant during the very first few moments that this infant arrives to us. Remember, he was in that nice little physiologically flexed position in utero. Shoulders were rounded, his knees were up, and the fact that he had the ability to get his hands close to face and mouth. He, had the ability to extend, and he had the ability to come back into flexion. And so we bring him into our world, and we have brought him into a very stressful environment, and we need to find out how we, number one, can decrease that stress on that admission. We need to find out how we can gain his trust, because remember, once we take him, put his arms out, legs out, hips abducted, then of course, we have this infant experiencing a significant level of stress, and the fact that this infant is no longer in control, and the fact that he becomes very distrustful. So the first 24 hours that this infant is with us is some of the most critical time that we will have with this infant. And I think we have to really look at our practices and find out how we can shorten admission, how we can make admission a less stressful situation for the infant, and how when we have our parents come into the unit for the very first time, what their experience will really be like. Because remember, this is not what they had expected. When we take and look at this infant, I think one of the most amazing things is the fact that, we take for granted when our newborn infant comes to us, and the fact that he's fully developed, he's mature, and still has, room for growth to take place. But for the most part, he is mature and his systems are developed, and that they are able to handle much more appropriately some of the stressors or the environment with which he comes to. But our premature infant, remember, is very immature, very premature. and the fact that we have to realize that that brain is developing. It's always been very amazing to me to realize that neurons are born at the rate of 250,000 a minute on an average with a 9-month pregnancy. Remember that we're getting our infants to our unit somewhere around that 23, 24 week stage. So, they have hardly had that much time for neurons to have the opportunity for growth and development. Remember that that intrauterine environment is a much more controlled and predictable environment than what the nursery environment is going to be for this infant. And the fact that the neurological system is one of the first systems to develop, but remember it's not fully mature. And that full maturation of brain growth and development is really not established until adulthood. So, when that infant gets to us at 23, 24 weeks, 500 grams or less, he's still got a lot of growing to take place. And he's going to be doing that in our NICU. We have to take and look at the fact that there are 3 developing systems that play a very, very important part with this infant. That is the central nervous system, the neurosensory system, and the musculoskeletal system. And in this segment of our topic today, we're going to look at some of the central nervous system development, and we're going to look at the neurosensory system development. And then we'll pick up that musculoskeletal system in our third sequence. So, when we're talking about the developing brain, if you just take and look at this chart and notice the fact of how much growth and development takes place with this infant, and the fact that the most aggressive brain growth and development takes place between birth and continues until the age of 3. And so, we're looking at this chart here, and we're looking at the 9-month full-term brain, is the last picture on our slide there on our chart, and the fact that it has a lot of hills and valleys. Have to remember that before I became a nurse, I was an early elementary education teacher. And so when you're teaching to your first, second, and third graders, sulci and gyro don't really mean a whole lot to them. But if you talk about peaks and valleys, and that the more peaks and valleys we have in the convolutions in the brain, the more established and the more productive that our brain will be. So therefore, we are taking and looking that our brain starts out very small. It continues to grow, but it's very smooth. And by the time we get to that 7th to 9th month, we start showing some sulci and gyro to take place. So, it's amazing that we have all of this growth and development taking place in our unit. It's one of those things that's hard for us to believe because we can't see it, we can't smell it, we can't touch it, we can't embrace it, but it is taking place right before our very eyes. You have to remember that the brain is the command center. This is, where, the action is taking place. When we look at the central nervous system, we have to take into account that there's several different stages of growth and development that are taking place. Number 1, we have proliferation. And that 6 to 24 week period of time, we have cell proliferation and we have cell migration taking place. And we have myelination that is taking place. And by 28 weeks, we've got brain volume that more than doubles at this point in time. This is a very, very critical period for brain growth and development because remember that at 28 weeks, our germinal matrix has the largest capacity at any other point in time. And the fact that our infants are very, very vulnerable to IVHs at this particular point in time, because when the germinal matrix is at full capacity and we start having cell migration, then of course our chances of a IVH are very, very critical. And remember that we need to be able to avoid having any neurological implications that might cause us to have a delay in development. If you take a look at this next slide, and this is one that's always amazing to me, is the fact that we have got the brain here, and we've got the brain at 23 weeks, and the fact that we've got a 23 week, we've got a 27 week, and we have a term gestation. Look at the amount of growth and development that is taking place in this brain. It is always just amazing to me as to what's happening. And between that 23-week and that 40-week brain, think about all the synaptic development that has been taking place here. Think about all of the support issues that have been instigated during this period of time to bring us to this point. So I think when we take a look at this, we have to say, geez, what a powerful, organ the brain is, and how much is taking place in our unit, and how we should protect this brain growth and development, and that we should be able to embrace the theory of creating an environment that is much more conducive for this growth and development to take place. We have to take, and if we look at proliferation, remember that's going to be taking place 3 to 4 months gestation. That's where our neural and our ganglial cells are being produced, they're being stored. And remember, this is where our germinal matrix is becoming larger and larger. During this period of time of proliferation, this is a highly critical process. Our infants are very, very subject to insults at this particular point in time. If we take and we look at migration, germinal matrix, becomes smaller because migration is taking place at this time. And this is usually taking place about 3 to 5 months gestation. We also know that the shape of the brain, that there's morphological transformations that are taking place due to all the cell migration that we are having to take place. And remember that this is where we're going to have the formation of the cerebral and the cerebellar cortex. We move on from migration to looking at dendritic arborization. And we're looking at that from about 18 to about 38 weeks. And I often look at this slide and sort of laugh, chuckle a little bit, because of the simple reason I have a son who's an environmental biologist. And I was working in my office and going through slides one day, and he knew I was going to be giving a talk to a group of nurses, and he came in and he says, "What are you talking about trees for?" And I said, "I'm not talking about trees, I'm talking about dendritic arborization." And I said, but that's great that you made that comment, because when dendritic arborization takes place, we're branching out. We're trying to branch out so we can facilitate that transfer of information along and throughout the central nervous system. And if you will take and look, as we are progressing, how our branches are getting longer, how they're really taking and setting out a root system, so to speak. I think a dendritic arborization, if you think about Arbor Day, an Arbor Day, they give us a tree, right? A seedling, and we're supposed to take it home and we're supposed to plant it. Well, that seedling needs to be planted in the right place. So he needs the right amount of light. He needs the right amount of water. He needs to have good soil. We need to know when to feed him fertilizer and when not to. And so therefore that he can set down a firm foundation, a good root system, and he can have long branching out roots so that he will flourish at the top and have the branching out as well. So, I think we have to take and look at that our infants are going through that process in our unit. And so we need to do what we can to help facilitate that and to promote that arborization that's taking place. And then, of course, we look at organization, and that's a very crucial component of brain growth and development, because this is usually happening anywhere from about 5 months, 2 years after delivery and early childhood. We need to realize that we need to have proper alignment. We need to have orientation. We need to have the layering that always takes place, within the cells of the brain. We also need to realize we need to have synaptic connections, So, so that the brain is firing so that we get all of the connections that we need. And then, of course, we need to realize that we need increased sulci development as well, and the dendritic arborization. All of these are things that take place in helping our brain to be more organized. And remember that during this period of time that we have the surface of the brain changing. It's changing from being that smooth surface to being that convoluted surface. Remember the sulci and the gyro, the hills and the valleys, according to our kids in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. So we really need to make sure that organization is truly established so that that circuitry that we need that really distinguishes what the human brain can do all takes place. And then, of course, myelination. We're going to see myelination taking place from about 8 months to a year. We're going to see that we have the ascending pathways to the spinal cord and the brainstem and so forth to 30 weeks. And then, of course, it's going to be progressive to the thalamus, to the cortex by 37 weeks. So, you know, there's a lot of activity going on in our brain during this period of growth and development, and it's all a very critical period for this infant. And we need to be keenly aware of how we can take and protect this period of time for our infants, because it is a sensitive period of development. And the cells are responsive to certain stimuli, specific stimuli during this period of time, and that there is a specific order that our neurosensory system is developing. And is an inappropriate stimulus going to affect this critical period and this opportunity for growth and development? And then what does stimulus do to our brain, you know, for further, or how could it alter further development with our infants? You know, experiences can truly confuse the brain cells. So we really need to be aware of this so that we maintain an environment that will be as conducive to growth and development as the intrauterine environment was. Very hard to do, but it's challenging, but it is doable, and it's something that we actually can provide for this infant. He may not be floating in an amniotic sac, and he may not be embraced by the intrauterine wall, but he will be given an environment that will be conducive to growth and development. Because remember, when we have pathways that take the wrong turn in the road, then we have long-term implications and alterations and structural changes that take place, which may mean that both our short-term and long-term outcomes may not be what we would have designed for this infant.